You know, it really feels like we're living through some crazy, chaotic times, doesn't it? But what if I told you that all these massive shifts we're seeing, the political fights, the shaky economy, the global power struggles, what if none of it is new? What if it's all part of a predictable cycle that's been repeating itself for the last 500 years, and we're just living through the next chapter? Today, we're going to take a look at that historical map.
So this whole idea really started with a big aha moment from investor Ray Dalio. He realized that the biggest shocks that caught him off guard, the market crashes, the huge political upsets, they weren't random at all. They were just things that had never happened in his lifetime. And that realization made him zoom way, way out, looking back 5 centuries to find the patterns that really explain how our world works.
And this whole deep dive into history, it all kicked off because of one single, totally baffling event that seemed to break all the rules of logic. The year was 1971.
So picture this. It's a Sunday night, and President Nixon gets on TV and announces that the U.S. is cutting the dollar's tie to gold. It was a huge deal. Basically, the government was breaking one of its biggest financial promises. Dalio, who was just a young clerk on the stock exchange floor back then, he was prepared for total chaos the next morning. He expected a complete meltdown. But what happened? The exact opposite. The market went through the roof.
I mean, that's the big question, right? It makes no sense. A country basically says it can't pay its bills in the way it promised, and investors get so excited they start buying up stocks. How on earth is that possible?
Well, to solve this puzzle, Dalio realized he didn't need a more complicated economic formula. He just needed a bigger history book.
And get this. It turns out this had all happened before. Almost 40 years earlier, back in 1933, President Roosevelt did the exact same thing for the exact same reason. America had promised way more gold than it actually had in the vault. This wasn't just history rhyming, it was pretty much a carbon copy.
And seeing this happen twice uncovered this timeless rule about money. When a government cuts the cord and can just print cash freely, the money in your pocket becomes worth less. But the value of real stuff, like stocks, buildings, gold, it goes up. It's the same exact playbook they used in 1933, 1971, and yep, they ran it again in 2008 and 2020.
So here's the big takeaway, right? The past isn't just a collection of stories. It's a blueprint. And this one realization that big events repeat in pretty predictable ways, well, that became the key to understanding a much, much bigger pattern about how nations rise and fall.
Okay, so that one insight led Dalio to look at where we are right now. He quickly saw that all this money printing was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. He realized there are 3 massive forces all hitting at the same time, things he'd never seen in his life, but that history has seen over and over again.
First, we have absolutely staggering amounts of debt, and governments are just printing money like crazy to deal with it. Second, you see these huge fights happening inside countries, this growing divide between the rich and the poor, and all the political polarization that comes with it. And third, there's a huge power shift happening on the world stage, with a rising China challenging the United States for the top spot.
Now, any one of those things on its own is a big deal, but when you get all 3 happening at once, well, history shows that's a massive red flag. That combination almost always means a major change in the world order is coming. And this repeating pattern of rising and falling powers is what he calls the big cycle.
And you can see this cycle play out again and again over the last 500 years. The Dutch Empire rose, and then it fell. It was replaced by the British. The British Empire rose, and then it fell. Replaced by the United States. And each time, that pattern of gaining and losing power looks remarkably similar. So the big question now is, where are the US and China in that very same cycle?
Okay, so how does this cycle actually work? Let's break it down. It really boils down to 3 distinct phases that pretty much every great power goes through. First up, you have the rise. This usually kicks off right after a major conflict, like a war, that kind of resets the global chessboard and establishes a new power as the leader, with a new set of rules. Now, this rise isn't an accident. It's like a powerful chain reaction. It starts with a productive, well-educated population. That leads to tons of innovation, which makes the country super competitive on the world stage. Then you get strong financial centers popping up to fund all this growth. And finally, you build a powerful military to protect your trade routes and your interests. Each step builds on the one before it. Next, after all that climbing, the empire reaches the top. This is the golden age. Think peace, prosperity, life is good. But here's the irony. The very things that caused the decline later on, they're planted right here, at the absolute peak of success. See, success starts to create problems. The country's workers get too expensive, so they're not as competitive anymore. The people get used to the good life, maybe lose a little bit of that hunger and drive. The country starts borrowing huge amounts of money, creating dangerous financial bubbles. And, this is a big one, the gap between the rich haves and the poor have-nots gets wider and wider, creating a lot of tension.
And all of that leads, almost inevitably, to the third and final act, the decline. All those little cracks that formed at the top, they start to break open under pressure.
So what sets it off? Usually a financial bubble bursts. The government's first move is to just print a ton of money to paper over the problems. Then, as the economy gets shakier, those internal fights over money and values get really nasty. All this chaos inside the country creates the perfect opening for that rising rival power to challenge the old, weakened empire.
So, looking at this whole cycle from rise to top to decline, you can't help but ask the obvious question, right? Where are we in all of this, and what does it mean for what's coming next?
And this whole journey through history brings us to a really crucial point. An empire's fate isn't usually decided by some outside enemy. It's decided from within. Decline isn't something that just happens to a country. It's a choice. It's the result of how a nation handles its own success and how its people treat each other.
And according to this 500-year model, the prescription for staying strong is surprisingly simple. Now, it's not easy, but it is simple. It boils down to just two things. First, as a country, you have to earn more than you spend. And second, you have to treat each other well and actually work together. Everything else kind of follows from that. In the end, you can think of a country's strength kind of like a person's health. You can measure it. There are vital signs you can check to see if it's getting stronger or weaker. This historical framework gives us the tools to do just that. So the real question it leaves us with is, are we even paying attention to our own vital signs?